ladies and gentlemen, please give us a warm welcome for John Donlon. Back in bed.
Hello again, everyone. It was a good lunch, wasn't it? I'm based in Boston. I always feel like when I come out to California, there's better food out here. I don't know what it is. Yeah, there is, yeah. And coincidentally, I've got a little bit of a food story that I wanted to share with you to kick things off. So if we could flash back to 8-year-old John Donlon, sitting Saturday morning watching cartoons, and this thing comes on in between the cartoons, and it's this sort of instructional little video of how to make your own orange juice popsicles. You guys remember this? You take out the ice cube tray, you pour in the orange juice, you put a little saran wrap over the top, put the toothpicks in, pop it in the freezer, boom. A couple hours later, you've got your own orange juice popsicles. 8-year-old me was like, oh my God, I got to do this. So I ran upstairs, did it, worked out great. And of course, being an 8-year-old boy, I started thinking, well, what other beverages do I enjoy drinking? And what do 8-year-old boys drink a lot of? They drink a lot of milk. So what I decided to do was to make some milksicles. So I went through the same process, poured the milk in, popped it in the freezer. A couple hours later, pulled them out. Oh my God, it was so disgusting. I can't begin to tell you how gross it was. So that didn't work out too well. But now we'll fast forward a little bit, and we've got middle school age John Donlon. And so now I'm coming home, and 12, 13-year-old kids, they're coming home from school. What are they? They're super hungry, and I could not eat enough when I was that age. So I always used to have a snack, and the snack that I liked to have was a bologna and cheese sandwich. And sometimes one wasn't enough. I'd make one, I'd make two, make three sometimes. Bologna and cheese sandwiches, wash it down with, yes, a big cup of milk. You're seeing a theme here. So one day I was thinking about this, and I'm like, all this bread, it's just filler. I don't need the bread. What I really like is the bologna and the cheese. So that Saturday night, I went out with my dad. We had a thing where we used to do the grocery shopping together on Saturday nights. We went out. I got a big pack of bologna, big pack of Kraft sliced singles. That next Monday after school, I came home and I made a massive bologna and cheese sandwich. Bologna, cheese, bologna, cheese, bologna, cheese. Oh my God, I was in heaven. It was great. So I sat down to eat this thing. I got about 3 bites in, and I think I started getting the bologna sweats. It was like, I may or may not have passed out. It's not entirely clear what happened. So fast forward a number of years now into the future, and just a few years ago, and I was watching, some of you might be familiar with the show Top Chef, and this is Tom Colicchio, who's one of the hosts of the show, and he was giving some feedback on one of the things that one of the contestants had made. And he made the comment, he said, when a dish fails, it's either a failure of concept or execution. And I thought, that makes a lot of sense. And I started reviewing my past culinary adventures, and I thought, I made those milksicles perfectly. I mean, the toothpicks might have been a little crooked, but the bologna and cheese was stacked up perfectly, right angles with the cheese. The problem, it was a terrible idea. That was the problem with that. And when we think about being data-driven, it's a great concept. It's a perfect concept. It makes total sense. It makes the most sense in the world. I think it's the sort of thing that we'll look back on the idea of being data-driven 10 years from now, and we'll think, why was that even a thing that we had to worry about and put energy towards? It's just something that's ingrained in us now. The problem is in the execution. And the problem is we get guys like this. We get executives that come in and they start pounding the conference room table and they say, we must be data-driven. But they're just wearing goofy wigs and they got a banana for a gun. And the problem is there isn't much teeth behind the idea of being data-driven. And Bonnie mentioned this morning. It's a great phrase. It's a great buzzword people like to throw around. But what does it really mean to be data-driven? And so that's what we're going to dig into today. So like Christine mentioned, we're seeing a lot of lip service around the idea of being data-driven, but not a lot of action behind it, or a lot of misaction, I should say. The other thing is that when it comes to being data-driven, organizations tend to just grab at whatever data is easy, whatever data is in front of them, and not stop and think about the data that's important. So that's a little bit of an issue. And the other thing is, I think people sit around, it's like mom and apple pie. Say, okay, yeah, sure, we should be data-driven. Now, who owns that? Who's going to go make us data-driven? And so there's a little bit of a responsibility gap that we're seeing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you today an architecture for thinking about what it means to be data-driven, what are those attributes, a way of assessing your proficiency around being data-driven, and then talk about a process that'll help you, enable you to be more data-driven. Okay? So it's funny, I have a little bit of a distaste for people who get up on stage and they start off a presentation and they say, Webster's defines data as, and they sort of use that as a crutch. But I'm going to go back on my philosophy here and talk a little bit about definitions, because I think the taxonomy is important. And I think the taxonomy that Bonnie reviewed this morning is important too. So when we think about data, what does that really mean? Well, there's this outer ring, first of all, of what we think of as information. And this is the broadest sense, right? We walk down the street, we're bombarded with information every day. And it's really only limited by our sensors that we have out there. So what we see and hear and the ability for us to be able to absorb the information that's out there. But that's the most general sense of what we mean. We start to get a little bit more focused on that. Now we're thinking about this idea of intelligence. So this is information it's a little more relevant to our subject matter. Maybe it's been packaged up so it's a little bit easier to consume. But this squares with what we think about. We think about like customer intelligence or market intelligence. It's got a little bit more relevance for the topic that we care about. But then at the bullseye is this idea of insights. And so here what we're doing is we're really inferring information from that other data. We're drawing conclusions. It's like we're reading between the lines. And this is the highest order of data that we want to get to. So by the way, the word data to me is the digital manifestation of all of this. So it's the ones and zeros, the bits and bytes. All this stuff is data. So as I go through this presentation, I may mix and match some of these terms. I'm going to try and say data and information just to keep it the most general. But the idea is that we're trying to grow from data, from information to intelligence to insights. That's really the highest order. Okay. So I wanted to share with you something that I think is kind of interesting in terms of how data injects itself into marketing. So if you think about any closed-loop business process, and a truly closed-loop business process, it consists of three things. First of all, we're going to set up our strategy. We're going to do some planning. So we're going to figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. Then there's the execution. There's the actual doing of it. And then there's an analysis that follows right afterwards. And that analysis feeds back into our strategy for the next go-around. What's interesting is that data informs all three of these steps, but in slightly different ways. And there's two different types of data that you need to be aware of. The first is performance data. And this is the data that we tend to rush to when we think about being data-driven. What are our metrics, our KPIs? How did we do last quarter against our targets? What did we do wrong and what can we do better? That's all performance data, and it's really important. But there's another set of data that's important too, and that's operational data. And this is the kind of information, basically it's, if you think about the performance data as internally focused, it's all about us and our organization, how we performed. Operational data is more externally focused. So it's things like our target audience. What do we know about our customers and our prospects? What do we know about our competitors or the market as a whole, our partners? So it's trying to understand who they are and what they've been doing. Think about it as the input that I need to do my job. I always like to use the example of an SDR. So here I am, I'm an SDR, I'm inheriting leads from marketing, and my job is to qualify them. What kind of information do I need? I need to know who this person is, what their title is, what kind of interactions they've had with us in the past. All of that is operational data. It has nothing to do with performance data per se. So it's a different kind of data, and where you go source that data and cleanse that data is different from the performance data. The other thing that I think is interesting is that these different types of data apply themselves at different points in this little virtuous cycle that we have. So when you're figuring out your strategy, you need both kinds. You need to understand from a performance perspective how you did in the last period, but you also need to understand the market landscape and what your opportunity is going forward. When you're in execution mode, if I'm that SDR and I'm qualifying reps, I really don't care about performance data as much. I just need that operational data so I can do my job. But then quickly afterwards, there's going to be an analysis period, and now this is mostly about performance data. Okay, and again, that feeds back up into the strategy piece of things. So one of the things that I wanted to call out is that this little generic virtuous cycle of anything that we do and how it uses data, it applies to everything that we do in marketing. So if you think about what we do in portfolio marketing, we're trying to understand our target audience, or at a more granular level, our personas. Data is important for that. In demand creation, it helps sets up traditional things like our nurture streams that we might do, or even more advanced things like digital advertising and programmatic advertising. With comms, it's going to help us measure our branding and our reputation, so that awareness, perception, and preference. And it's also going to help us engage socially better with our target audience. And then I know we have a lot of marketing ops folks in the audience here today, so of course it helps with things like touch analysis and attribution. It also helps us identify, Carrie mentioned this earlier today, helps us identify our ideal customer profile. And on the flip side, what accounts are at risk, so we can understand what those are and treat them with white glove service. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here in terms of the idea of data is important, but I wanted to highlight for you exactly where it can be applied to different areas of marketing. So one thing that we've been looking into really closely at Serious Decisions is what does it mean to be data-driven? And one of the things that we came to is that there are really 3 key questions that you need to think about. The first one is, what information do I need to run my business? And this came up when we had the panel discussion. The speakers earlier have talked about this. Let's just think, clean slate, whiteboard, what information do I need to run my business? The second is, okay, if I had that information, is the team able to take it and put it to use? That's a big gap that we're seeing. And third, is this information trustworthy? So this was a big thing when we started looking into this idea of being data-driven. It's very much implied in there that it's fact-based. We're making data-based decisions. Well, the data must be right. It must be fact-based. And so is this data trustworthy? So what we did is we took these three questions and we built out 8 attributes lining up with 3 different categories of what it really means to be data-driven. The first one is about this idea of insight activation. So the first and very most important thing is you have to be able to ask the right business questions. If you can't ask the right business questions, then all of this is sort of for naught. We have to be able to know what insights we're looking for, and that's really important. And the other thing is we have to take those insights and we have to apply them to all 3 steps of those virtuous cycles. So we have to think about, we've got these great insights. How am I going to use that for my strategy? How am I going to use it for execution and also for analysis? So that's the insight activation piece. Then we come to this idea of team enablement. So we've got these great insights. How is the team going to put them to use? There's 3 areas here that we want to think about. One is just a skills and training perspective. So it's great that we've got this, we've got all this data, but if the team doesn't know how to use it or they don't know how to take raw information and meld that down into insights, I've got a Google alert, that's great. How can I combine that with other information that I'm seeing about my account to understand really what's going on? Then it's really no good. There's also a tools enablement piece of this. So we might have Full Circle, we might have some other tools in place. But does the team know how to use it? Do the right people know how to use that tool and put it to work? So that's important. And then finally, there's this idea of cultural transformation. And this is a big, hairy one, and it's hard, and it takes a long time. But what we see at the more higher-performing organizations is that they're really uncomfortable with making any kinds of decisions that aren't based in data. They crave data. They're not okay with just going by opinion or what the hippo said, the highest paid person's opinion. They really need data to make their decisions. And so that's an important element as well. And then finally, this is where we traditionally think about being data-driven or maintaining the data. It's all about managing the data itself. So we're going to look for things around quality, unifying the data, bringing it together from the different silos, and also serving it up for distribution so that the team has access to it. We need to think about governance of that data management. So we're going to work with other teams to make sure the data is curated over time. And then there's also a tools aspect of this as well. So there's some data administration, fuzzy matching and deduping tools that we can apply to managing the data. So these are the 8 attributes of what it means to be data-driven. If you can look down this list and you can say, yep, we've got all of those nailed, then you are truly data-driven. Everybody else remains seated. we got a little more work to do. So one of the interesting things that we did is we took those 3 big categories and we brought them together and we said, okay, well, ideally we want to have all 3 of these things. And if we're sitting in the middle of that intersection, then obviously that's nirvana. We've got all 3 working for us. But let's take a look at what it means to have 2 out of 3. Okay, so the first one is what we call misguided conclusions. And the situation here is we know what questions to ask. So that insight activation piece is fine. We know what questions to ask. And the team knows how to get access to the data, so that's great. The problem is the underlying data is terrible. It's bad. And this can be bad in 3 different ways. One can be that the data is bad, and you just kind of look the other way. You don't care. You say, it's got to be directionally correct. 80-20 rule, I'm sure it's fine. The problem is that's a slippery slope, because you don't know that it's 80-20. It could be 60-40, 30-70, 595. 595. If you're assumptions start sounding like an interstate highway. You're off in the wrong direction. So that's bad. So if you're just kind of ignoring bad data, that's bad. The other one is if the data is bad and you know it, and now you're paralyzed. Because we say, well, the data is bad. We can't draw any conclusions from this. What are we going to do? And now we're back to assumptions and making decisions based on a couple of customer conversations, and that's not good. And then the third scenario is that the data is bad, but we have no idea. So the data is telling us to invest in North Korea. Let's go. That sounds great. Let's chase it. Bad idea genes. Okay, so you don't want to get after that. So that's one scenario, is misguided conclusions. The other scenario is what we call information handcuffs. So once again, we know what questions to ask. So the inside activation is great. And the underlying data is terrific. The problem is there's this blockage between us and the data. So maybe we have a centralized BI team that's just swamped and can't take our request. Or I was talking to a client the other day, and he said, he asked something of his marketing ops team. He said, I wanted to know something about their performance in the prior quarter. And the marketing ops guy sent him this huge spreadsheet and said, well, just run pivot tables on this. All the answers are in there. He was like, A, I don't have time to do something like that. And B, I hate to admit this, but I can't run pivot tables. So, there's this enablement gap that we have. And so now we're handcuffed. We can't get access to what's otherwise good information. And then the third scenario is what we call fact babble. And so in this one, everyone's got access to the data. They're psyched to use it. They know where to get it. The underlying data itself is great. The problem is we really don't know what questions to ask. And so we're in there and we're generating reams and reams of reports. We're bumping around in the dark. And we're just not as pointed as we could be about what data matters and what insights matter. So, when you look at these, hopefully you've been, sort of thinking about, well, where's my organization? We're sort of, maybe we're one of these three. The good news is what I'm going to share with you in the next few slides is a process for no matter which scenario you might be in or a combination of all three of these, how you can start to get better around being data-driven. Okay? So this is a 7-step process in terms of how you can start to grow your proficiency around being data-driven. And the first step really starts with painting the vision. One of the things that we see missing is, we've got our friend wearing the gray wig and the bananas, and he's saying we must be data-driven. But they don't really know where to start. They don't know what that means. So the first thing, and this is something for the senior leadership team to do, is they have to paint the vision. They have to say, this is what it means to be data-driven. Here's our North Star, and here's how we're going to go after it. Now, we don't have a lot of details at this point of how we're going to do it, but some of the things that we can produce are a mission statement. We've seen organizations do that. It's important to define the scope so that you're not trying to be data-driven for the whole organization if that's just wildly out of your control. Maybe it's just your team that you're trying to affect. And we're going to come up with a high-level project plan for what this means. Now, again, we don't have a lot of the details, but we're going to kind of start to sketch that out and show people that we really mean that this is an initiative. By the way, on all these slides, you're going to see in the middle there is a serious decisions model that supports each of these steps. It's a long-time running joke. There's a model for that. There's a framework for that. So I'm not going to talk to those models. I'm not here to sort of play up that aspect of it. But just for those of you that are clients, know that there's a model that sits behind each of these steps. The second step now is we're going to get to sit down and articulate those insights. So this is that whiteboard exercise. Never mind how lousy the data is. Never mind how siloed it is. Stop and think about what information it is that you need to do your job. And this can be the CMO, it can be everyone down to the marketing specialist. What information do you need, either from a performance perspective or an operational data perspective, the stuff that you need to do your daily tasks? So the nice thing about this is whereas that first step was all about the senior leadership team getting up and saying, this is the direction we're going in, now marketing ops has a big role. They're going to facilitate this exercise. They're going to go around to the different functional leads, and they're going to draw out of them what are those insights that you want to see. So the deliverables here are the data requirements, those two types of data, the requirements for each of those. Okay. Now in the third step, we're going to take a hard look at what our capabilities are. We're going to say, all right, let's think about those three categories of insight activation, of team enablement, and data management. And we're going to say, how good are we at that? We just went through this exercise of trying to articulate what insights we need. Were we very good at it? How good are we with training? Or what's the culture look like in our organization right now? And we want to look at what we're doing with our data. Are we able to keep our data clean? Bonnie, you had mentioned before in your opening remarks about how as soon as you get the data in, it just starts to decay. It's like a rotting head of lettuce, or the fish that comes out of water, and it's all of a sudden it just starts to decay immediately. So what kinds of processes do we have in place? So we'll do things like we'll do stakeholder interviews, we'll draw some process maps, we'll do a data health check, and we'll understand how we're doing across all three of those categories in terms of our capabilities. The fourth step now is we're going to put our money where our mouth is. One of my colleagues, Jeff Lash, has a saying that I really like, and it's that budget is the ultimate expression of strategy. And it's really true, isn't it? I mean, you can talk all you want about your plans and your strategy, but at the end of the day, where that money gets allocated is what you're going to focus on. And so this is the step where we say, okay, we've heard from our constituents, we know what their needs are, we've done this audit of where we are today, so we have some sense of a gap analysis. Now we know where we're going to put our time, where we're going to put our people, and where we're going to put our money. So coming out of this is, we're going to see that budget allocation, but we're also going to see now a detailed project plan, because now we know enough about our situation that we can map out what we're going to do in the next 3, 6, 9 months to get better at this. This is an exercise for the senior leadership team to go through, but marketing ops can support this as well. The fifth step now is we actually start to start fixing stuff, which is nice. So we're going to focus on that data management piece, and we're going to bolster what we need to do with the infrastructure. So we're going to take a look at what we're doing around data quality, around data unification. What scenarios do we need to bring the data together and serve it up in one place? What's the distribution look like? Do the right people have access to the right data? We're going to look at that. We're going to look at our governance processes. So we've got to figure out how well interlocked we are between, this is about marketing and marketing data and insights, but how well are we interlocked with sales, with IT, with legal for compliance issues? So we're going to take a look at that. So all these things, this is marketing ops. This is right in your wheelhouse. So you can go down in the basement, start banging on the pipes. Now, hopefully now we know what kind of situation we're in, so there's some money, there's some resource dedicated to fixing this stuff, maybe more than there was before, and so we can really start to bolster the infrastructure. All right, we're in the home stretch here. Step 6 of 7, you guys are hanging with me. You're doing a great job. So here's where we're going to address our enablement issues. And this is tough. There's another saying I like to lean on, that the soft stuff is the hard stuff. And that's really true when it comes to enablement. This training piece, or hiring the right people. Do you just go out and hire a fleet of data scientists? Is that the right thing to do? We need to think about what we need to do to train our folks up to not only be able to take in the different information and intelligence feeds, but to start to make sense of it and draw those insights out. So sometimes we'll see organizations will pair up a senior person with a junior person, or a data scientist with sort of Joe Marketer. That helps. The other thing is you want to be sure to embed this into your onboarding practices. So you don't want to just kind of do a one-time training. You want to have a drumbeat of training, and you want to have it for all the new people that are coming in. And then the cultural piece, this is, like I said, this is a tough piece. It's a tough one to start to turn. But I have seen a couple of examples of how you can start to turn an organization that sort of shrugs their shoulders at data to one that really starts to crave data. One is to start with a small pocket of the business. Pilot what it means to be data-driven in that business. Look for a group that is particularly eager to get started with this. Maybe they've had some kind of wall that they haven't really been able to do it. You're bound to have a little bit more success with that group, so you pilot it, you publicize your success, and then you expand from there. So that's one thing. The other, and this is a little bit trickier, but it's great when it works, is to go find your biggest naysayer and convert them. So I was talking to a client a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about this exact scenario. They had, I'm going to pick on sales here, but kind of a typical sales rep, kept all their stuff offline, didn't want to throw it in Salesforce. If they added a contact, it had like 3 pieces of information. And then what would happen? They'd enter their opportunity, and it would close 3 days later, and they looked like the hero, right? They'd sort of come out of nowhere. Meanwhile, you've got a 3-month sales cycle, so it seems completely ludicrous. And so they went to that person, and they started showing them the benefits of adding their information to Salesforce and what it means when everybody starts doing that, and they showed the other information that was available from some of the other reps. And they turned him, and he said, this is great. It's not a lot of extra work, the way you've set up the tools for me to be able to do this. And now he's become their biggest advocate. And that is so powerful when you can do that, when you can take that guy who's in the back of the room with his arms crossed going, yeah, right, I'm not doing that. And then he's on stage and he's singing your praises. That's really powerful. So that's one of the ways that you can start to change the culture. So the last piece of this now is just we're gonna refine our processes over time, and this is we see this in the last step of a lot of processes like this. But the idea is, and we mentioned this a little bit earlier, is it's hard to go from an initiative, which is really kind of project-based, to more of a program, an ongoing program. So it's really easy to put a lot of energy, it's relatively easy, to put a lot of energy and enthusiasm into a project. It's time-bound, you can see where the end is, everybody gets excited, but now when it turns into run rate maintenance work, it's not as exciting. And so making that transition and having a plan for it, developing dashboards, understanding what we're gonna do from a continuous improvement perspective is really important in this step. One of the things that's interesting here too is that we found organizations get better at asking questions over time. So that second step of the process was articulate the insights. You're probably not going to get them right the first time out of the gate, and that's okay. Know that there might be some curiosity metrics in there. Know that all those insights might not be useful, but the key is to examine whether they were useful or not and continue to iterate and add in some new ones. And then the business shifts all the time as well, so there may be new insights that you're going to need. So it's really important to keep this continuous improvement cycle going. So that's it, 7 quick steps, zip, zip, boom, you're data-driven. It's not so hard, right? So I know we've got about a day's worth of the conference left here, and then we're into the weekend. And I wanted to give you some action items, some things to think about over the next few days before you get back to the office on Monday and get back to the daily grind. One is, think about at your organization, if you really do want to be data-driven, who is the champion that can make this happen? Who's that person that can stand up like our banana-toting wig guy who can stand up and paint the vision? Is that you? It might be you. It might be somebody else on the senior leadership team. And if it is, start to partner with them. Start to socialize these ideas of what it means to be data-driven. Start to get a realistic sense of where your proficiency levels lay now and what you're going to need to do to fix them. And then you can start to build the business case more broadly to get this initiative off the ground. The other thing, and this is the last saying that I'll kind of lean on, it's a little kitschy, but I've always liked it, is be the change you wish to see in the world. If you really believe in being data-driven, if you're passionate about being data-driven, you be data-driven. You be that shining star on the hill example of what it means to be data-driven. Then people are going to look at you and they're going to say, oh yeah, look at that. Christine, she's data-driven. She kind of kicks ass. I think we should all be like Christine, right? That's going to go a long way towards changing the culture as well. So if you can embrace these attributes of what it means to be data-driven, if you can give yourself an honest assessment of where you are and start to create a roadmap for getting better, these are the kinds of things that are going to lift you out of the world of milksicles and bologna and cheese Dagwood sandwiches and set you and your organization on the path to being more of a top chef. Thank you.